The 4 dirt roads extended out in different directions, as if they were trying to escape one another. On either side of the roads, wild grass waved in the wind, interspersed with vibrant patches of purple-yellow flowers. Fading in the sun was a sign, bearing the white words, Santa Rosa, population 16,531. Disturbing the tranquil atmosphere was the faint sound of tires on the road, heralding the approach of a mechanical vehicle. As it passed, a cloud of dust settled, revealing a solitary figure, cloaked in confusion. The car drove away, and the crossroads returned to its ordinary state. Emerging from the sea of green was a young girl, her body covered in tatters and her skin stained with blood. Her slender fingers were clutching a brown leather wallet that may have contained some hint of her identity. In her pale green eyes shone a sorrow that she could no longer recall, a grief so deep it seemed like it could only be understood by a blank sheet of paper. With the leather wallet in hand, she decided to head in the direction that the sign pointed to. Although she had no recollection of how she had gotten to the crossroads, nor who she was, fragments of past experiences began to reveal themselves. She remembered her 10th birthday and the first time she went to Disneyland. Any memories other than her childhood, however, were shrouded in a mysterious fog. After hours of trudging through the California desert, she finally arrived at what she thought was Santa Rosa. The streets were lined with pale houses and brightly colored trees. A sign hung outside one of the houses, rooms available. She approached the 3-story building and in a daze entered the tall glass-paned doors. Inside, she was taken aback by the beauty of the first room. 2 staircases descended from the 2nd floor, their rails crafted from blood oak and mahogany, and the pillars that supported them were intricately carved with intricate patterns that could only be seen from up close. The girl was in a dreamlike state, taking in all the intricate details of the woodwork and paintings around her. She stood in the middle of the front room, turning slowly to absorb all of the details. Suddenly, a door flew open from behind the front desk, and a woman in her mid-30s emerged. Her eyes were tired, but they betrayed her age. She held an old leather-bound book that appeared to be from the Renaissance age and placed it on the desk. Quickly, she ran her finger down a list of names, dates, and room numbers until she found a blank space on the old, faded page without looking up at the girl. The motel owner spoke in a dull, almost acidic voice when they declared, "We do not permit murderers to stay in our rooms." The girl asked with an edge in her voice, "What are you referring to? Who has been killed? What is happening?" The woman demanded that the person get out before she called the police. "You should already know the answers to the questions you're asking," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. She then leaned down and grabbed something from underneath her desk. A loud click reverberated in the room, followed by the sound of a gun being loaded. Her message was clear. She meant business. The girl said she was leaving as she started to walk out of the building. "All right, it's fine," she added. The girl walked down the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face. Her steps felt heavy, and the motel she had just left seemed to be burning behind her. The woman's voice, ringing in her head like a bell, seemed to echo an accusation. "Murder!" Over and over, the words repeated in her mind. Questions and confusion raced through her mind, and she found herself asking, "Why is this happening? What's going on? Who am I?" In an attempt to make the voices stop, she cupped her hands over her ears, but no amount of physical effort could shut out the inner turmoil that had taken over her. After walking past mom and pop stores, country clubs with golfers aiming to hit the gophers, and gated communities that seemed to be their own little countries, she arrived at the last street of houses in town. The street was lined with homes of all shapes and sizes, each one immaculate. The lush green lawns made the street look like an island paradise compared to the dark asphalt. The aroma of freshly cut grass and grilling steaks hung in the air, creating a sense of nostalgia. She wished she could live in one of these perfect houses, surrounded by a loving family. Someone called out from behind her, shattering her thoughts. "Hey!" Without any hesitation, she took off down the street. Sweat poured down her face from the sweltering heat and the fear that was gripping her. The sound of her running shoes pounding against the pavement echoed in her ears. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet dropped away and everything shifted. Time seemed to slow and life came to a standstill as she fell. The blazing hot pavement broke her fall, and her arms protected her from smashing into the concrete. The sound of footsteps coming closer and then stopping beside her made her heart beat rapidly with terror. Tears streamed down her red face as she desperately attempted to flee the stigma of being labeled a murderer. With shaky hands, She started to crawl along the sidewalk, using the cracks to propel her forward. A light touch on her shoulder caused her to yelp and roll off the sidewalk, directly into the middle of the street. Cars whizzed by, shaking the asphalt beneath her. She reached for the curb and a hand grabbed hers, pulling her up and back onto the sidewalk. The noise of the cars made her panic attack worsen, and everything went dark as she succumbed to her fear. She opened her eyes and realized she was sitting in the passenger seat of a car that was moving at a high speed. Trying to open the door, she found that her hand passed right through it. She felt strange and couldn't quite make out what was going on. Everything around her seemed to be familiar, almost as if she had experienced it before. The car began to speed up, turning the scenery into a blur. She turned to the driver's side, hoping that whoever was in the driver's seat would see her. To her surprise, she discovered that the driver was herself. She wondered if this was her, or if it was merely a dream, or even a memory. The girl felt an increasing sense of panic as the car sped down the gravel road. She shouted at the driver to slow down, but her cries were ignored. Then, the sound of an irritating ringtone blared from a small gray flip phone. The driver glanced at it and in a fit of rage, hurled it at the car's window. It shattered, eliminating any visibility and leaving only the sound of rushing air. The car only accelerated, the stones on the road causing the windshield to crack further with every passing second. The girl murmured, "I remember this." Then she quickly exclaimed, "Oh no, look out!" The driver slammed on the brakes, causing the contents of the car to lurch forward and the windshield to explode into a million jagged shards that sliced through the vehicle. The car began to spin, then roll down the road. Everything went dark, and the cacophonous sound of cars sliding to a stop filled the air. An ear-splitting scream pierced the darkness, followed by an eerie silence and a deep pain that seemed to envelop her. She felt a sudden panic, the likes of which she had never experienced before. Her mind was racing with questions. "What's happening? Where am I? Oh God!" she exclaimed. She remembered that she had fainted, but why? Why couldn't she recall what had happened before that moment? She thought to herself, "I want to be someone different, someone who better reflects who I am." An unfamiliar voice filled the darkness. The words were muddled and unrecognizable. Suddenly, a tiny beam of light pierced the darkness and illuminated a small area around the girl. She felt drawn to the light, so she cautiously stepped towards it. As she inched closer, the light engulfed her and grew until it flooded the room. When the light dimmed, she opened her eyes to find herself in a pale, well-lit room. The room was almost empty, apart from a few items scattered around. The girl could make out the sound of a conversation in another room, and she felt oddly comforted by the unfamiliar surroundings. Deciding to take a moment to rest, she laid back down and soon drifted off to sleep. After half an hour, she fell back asleep. The darkness that surrounded her was briefly replaced by a twinge of fear. Her eyes filled with a familiar sadness, and then the crossroads she had been to before appeared. It was immediately clear that something was wrong. The ground was littered with mangled pieces of metal and glass shards. Following her instincts, she carefully walked around the area and came across the source of the metal and glass, a rollover car crash. The steam and mangled metal that covered the remains of the crash made it obvious that it had just occurred. All the pieces of her dream before began to fit together as she realized that this was the aftermath of the traumatic event. Her heart ached for the drivers of the cars. She followed a trail of disturbed earth and blood leading away from the crash and into the grass. In the grass, she found the driver of the car she had been in before, lying there with blood pouring from scrapes on her arms. Taking in the scene of tragedy, the girl turned her gaze away from the driver and walked away. The other driver was a young man who must have been returning from a trip. His car was shattered, and glass was scattered everywhere, while blood oozed out at a rapid pace. The girl wanted to help him, but it was too late. The impact of the crash had already taken its toll on him. Even though the accident couldn't have been prevented, she still felt responsible for the young man's sudden death. Then, her mind drifted to the times when she had first arrived in town and was labeled a murderer. Everyone probably blamed her for the man's death, and it all began to make more sense. She was abruptly jolted awake by a loud banging noise coming from the front door. She sprang up from where she had been sleeping and dashed to the source of the commotion. When she arrived at the entrance, she was met with a group of people who seemed to be shouting her name with anger. She stepped outside and confronted the people. She understood why he had come and said, "It seems like you want me to leave." I have learned from my mistakes and have become a different person than I was before. You need to leave this place immediately before anyone else gets hurt, someone yelled. She pulled out her old leather wallet from her pocket and said, Fine, I'll go, but before I leave. She looked down at the wallet with a sense of nostalgia and said, Just something to remember who I was and who I am no longer. With a determined gaze, she grabbed the ID inside and threw it at the townspeople. She stood tall and began walking down the road. One of the townspeople picked up the ID and studied it with a sorrowful expression. Aaron Jones, he murmured. So that was the girl's name. Maybe we were too hard on her, he said to the motel owner standing beside him. The motel owner declared, No, absolutely not. She made her own decision, so just let her go and let her continue to inflict terror elsewhere. After an hour of traversing through the darkness, Erin returned to the crossroads that marked the beginning of her journey. She stood in the middle of the four roads, attempting to figure out which direction to take. With a newfound strength and a newfound purpose, Erin kept walking forward, towards a new life with a chance at a fresh start. She was no longer bogged down with accusations. Instead, she had a clean slate and a new purpose in life, to write her own story. Crossroads of Amnesia follows the journey of a young woman caught in a web of confusion, identity crisis, and accusations. With no memory of her past or how she ended up in the middle of nowhere, she finds herself at a crossroads both literal and metaphorical, with a mysterious leather wallet as her only link to her forgotten past. Waking up in a sea of wild grass and dirt roads, she is compelled to navigate her way to the nearest town, Santa Rosa, a seemingly tranquil place where secrets lurk beneath the surface. Haunted by fragmented recollections of her childhood and an inexplicable sense of dread, she navigates her way through this strange reality, only to be confronted by shocking accusations and an uncomfortable realization of her possible identity. The narrative takes you on a roller coaster ride through the California desert, revealing bits and pieces of her shattered memory, her struggle with accusations, and her desperate need for acceptance. The story is a labyrinth of mystery, suspense, and self-discovery, as she battles with an identity she can't recall, and a town that appears to be as lost as she is. This tale is as much about self-discovery as it is about survival in the face of adversity. It explores how one confronts the ghosts of the past and the trials of the present in the hopes of finding a better tomorrow. As the young woman walks the path towards a hopeful new life, readers are invited to ponder the question, when all is stripped away, who are we really? Crossroads of Amnesia is a spellbinding story that unravels the human condition, our desire for identity, and the power of starting anew, offering a narrative that is as haunting as it is illuminating.